Hey gang, and welcome to the very exciting video brought to you by Wizards of the Coast. In today's video, I am going to be revealing the Bloomburrow Precon deck Peace Offering. It features blue, white, and green, and it's going to be a lot of fun because it's based around Group Hug. The deck was designed by Elizabeth Rice, who you might know better as Ellie the Veil. She wanted to redo the concept of what Group Hug is, and I think she nailed it out of the park. I know there's more than just her on the team who were involved with this, but she was the only one who I could find talking about it on Twitter. She wanted to basically change the concept of Group Hug as opposed to just being king-making into being kind of giving resources but also forwarding your own plan. And my goodness, do I think that the team nailed it out of the park on this. This deck is wild. You're going to see so many cool cards and so many ways to give people advantages, but with a slight tweak to help you out at the same time. I think it might be one of the coolest Group Hug decks I've ever seen, and frankly solves a lot of the problems that a lot of Group Hugs decks have, which is that they have no way of winning and basically just become kingmakers. The way I want to break down this video is by looking at first the new cards, obviously, then we'll look at the new art on old cards, because there's a lot of cool new ones, and then we'll look at the reprints and the value of the deck. I'll probably give my thoughts on the cards as they come, not to mention the art, so let's have fun and break it down. We're going to go alphabetically, starting with the Bloodroot Apothecary, and honestly it might already be my favorite card from this set. This 3-mana 3/3 has Toxic, and it has some sweet abilities. True to form, it's a Group Hug deck, so when it comes in, you're giving your opponent a tapped treasure. However, there's an incredibly punishing secondary effect, which is whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-creature token, they gain 2 poison counters. This means that if someone casts a Dockside Extortionist and this is out in the field, and they make at least 5 treasures, all of a sudden using those is going to quickly add up to them getting taken out of the game. This card will punish so much, and not just treasure tokens. This affects food tokens, clue tokens, map tokens, blood tokens, basically anything that has a built-in sacrifice to some advantage. People have to become very careful when using them around this card, and I think that's a lot of fun. Communal Brewing is another 3-mana green card, and I think it's a lot of fun. As it comes in, you can choose however many opponents to draw, and it's not a may, they have to draw those cards. What's even better though is you don't actually have to make your opponents draw cards to get the Communal Brewing counters onto it. It comes in with 1, so right off the bat, you're immediately getting a creature when it comes in afterwards with a +1/+1 counter. This means if you don't want to give your opponent stuff but still want to get a lot of value, Proliferate is the way to go. I think this is great. Fisher's Talent, I believe, has already been revealed. This is one of the cards from the main set, and it's a class card, which we first saw introduced in Adventures of Forgotten Realms. I have been a huge fan of the class cards. I think they're a great addition to Enchantments, and it's really good. 4 mana is a decent cost for a draw engine with upside, since this could potentially give you blockers at the same time. It doesn't take a lot of mana or time to make those 1/1s into massive 8/8s when you're drawing, and you still get to draw the cards even at max level. I think this is a great card, and something you should definitely consider if you're playing these colors. Jolly Gerbils is a fun name and a super cute card to boot, and this is from the main set as well. All it really does is turn any card that we cast with Gift on it into a draw engine, which already tends to be pretty good. These are getting so ridiculous. Mr. Foxglove is a cunning canine and the alternate commander for the deck. He's very well costed for what he does, and with some great abilities attached to him, I can see people playing him. First off, he's got lifelink, which is great because gaining life in commander does matter, and his second ability has 2 relevant modes depending on what type of opponent you attack. If an opponent has more cards than you do in hand, you get to basically do some quick math and draw cards based on how much they have versus how much you have, meaning this can help fill up your hand if you dumped it. I think Bant as a type has a lot of ways to build around that basically involve auras and enchantments and equipment, kind of like Rafik, so this is a good way to fill your hand up after dumping them all into your commander. The second ability is basically built around the idea that you have tons of draw, and that's if you have more cards in your hand than your opponent does, all of a sudden you get to cheat out a free creature. Sure, you don't get the on-cast ability as you do this, but there are big enough creatures that have awesome enter the battlefield effects that really doesn't make this a big deal. I think he's really fun. I think there's going to be a lot of fun ways to basically build around him, and what's even better is this is on attack, meaning you don't even have to connect. That means a card like Reconnaissance can do a ton of work in this deck as you pick your opponent based on what kind of effect you want to get, swing, get the ability, and then remove your commander from combat, basically protecting him and getting all that advantage. Miss Bumbleflower is the face card for this deck, and I think she is deceptively strong despite the fact that she's coming from a Group Hug deck. Well, that kind of looked like bunny ears. The idea that she's basically giving your opponents cards can be a bit kind of difficult to sort of justify. But you have to remember, her ability can target multiple opponents, meaning that every time you cast spells and get her pumps, you don't have to pick the same opponent, you can spread it around. The pump on her is very, very good. It gives evasion and it can make things bigger permanently, and if you do it 2 times in a turn, basically you're refilling the 2 cards that you spent to do so. I think this is an important thing to think about, not to mention the fact that the ability that she has to pump can be targeted on other people's creatures. This means if you play a card like Dismiss into Dreams, all of a sudden her ability starts targeting those illusions and they die. This is a fantastic way to clear stuff out. I think a lot of people are going to play her because she's got some super cute art, but I think the reality of it is this is a really good group hug commander that wants to have a secondary win con in the command zone if you're able to build around her properly. There's already a lot of cards in these color pairings, especially blue and green, that want you to cast spells that target stuff like Ivy and Nadu. This basically means that you can essentially build kind of a pump-based Voltron deck, and she's got Vigilance to boot, meaning she's a great attacker and blocker at the same time. I think this is a great design card, and I'm really curious to see it in action. Octomancer is one of those weird cards that I love to see in Commander, but on the flip side, I also don't really know how to properly assess it. At 5 mana, it's a 3/3, which is, okay. It does have the gift mechanic attached to it, meaning that it can potentially draw you a card thanks to something like the Jolly Gerbil, but what it lacks is a payoff for the gift mechanic. You're basically giving your opponent an 8/8 for essentially free until you get to the second part of the ability, which is that at the beginning of every end step, not just yours, you get to basically make a copy of a token creature that just came in that turn. So that means that 8/8 that you just gave your opponent means that you get an 8/8 as well. This gives you 11 power on 2 bodies for 5 mana, which isn't bad, and it potentially gives your opponent a giant basher to basically swing at someone else. Now, if you're playing against a token-based deck in an opponent's way, this card could see a lot of play. Otherwise, you need to have reliable ways to make tokens, which thankfully blue does have with things like Cackling Counterpart and other instant speed shenanigans. Worst case, you're doing it at sorcery speed and only getting stuff at the end of your turn, which isn't bad for free, but at the same time, you need to build around this quite heavily. Peerless Recycling is another card from the main set, and it's an instant speed kind of restrictive regrowth, which I think still can see a lot of play. It's also got the upside of potentially bringing back 2 permanents as opposed to 1, assuming you're okay with giving an opponent a card. I think this is a great card, it's well costed, and I think the downside is very minimal considering you can get back your 2 best permanents from your graveyard, or at the very least, 2 lands. Now we're getting to some of the juicy cards, and Steelbur Champion is an Offspring card, and it seems insane, at least in Precon. I think I would have to test it more in person, but it seems like it has potential. It's basically a Mana Gorger variant, and it has the upside of being able to pay 2 extra colorless and getting a second one. And what's wild to me in general is that Offspring typically depowers and detoughnesses their creatures, meaning you only get the enter the battlefield effect. In this case, both creatures are 1/1s, and both have the abilities and have vigilance attached to them. Getting the pump is more restrictive than the Mana Gorger Hydra, which just cares about an opponent's casting spells, but I think the trade-off is that having vigilance means you get a really good attacker and a really good blocker, possibly 2 of them spread out. I think this is a great card, and if your deck cares about +1/+1 counters, you're going to get a lot of them pretty quickly, I think. Tempt with Bunnies is a fun temptation card, and I think a pretty good example of exactly what you want to see with a group hug deck. For 3 mana, you get to make a 1/1 bunny and draw a card, and then each opponent has the option of doing the same. This means if people are behind or need blockers, they might be interested in taking you up on this. That said, if they do, you get that effect again. So that means at the minimum, you are getting a 1/1 and a card draw for 3 mana in white, which is really, really good. And at the upside, you get that many 1/1s and card draw based on however many opponents take you up on the deal. In a traditional game, this can end up with you having 4 1/1s and 4 cards for as little as 3 mana, which is pretty nuts if you think about it. And lastly, we have the 20-toed Toad, which is a bit of a tongue twister and fun to say. It's only taken me like 6 times to get it right in this one take, so hopefully I don't mess it up. But it's basically what I would consider the most flavorful card of the deck. Beyond the increased hand size, it has 2 other really good abilities, the first of which happens whenever you attack, not just with the Toad, and basically being able to pump it and drawing a card is great. It means that you can keep it back and keep it safe, since the third ability is an alternate win con. That means that whenever you have 20 +1/+1 counters on it, you just win the game. And that's awesome. I like that kind of stuff. I like the Biomancers, I like the Thassa's Oracle kind of wins. I think it's great to have other ways than just combo and combat to win yourself the game. This requires a lot of restrictions to be met, and it's not just going to happen easily like Thassa's Oracle after someone casts Demonic Consultation, so I think this is going to be a great win con for people who are looking for something a little bit more flavorful and a little bit outside of the beaten path. That being said, I just really like this card. It's flavorful, it's got a fun name, and it's an alternate win con, all of which are things that I just love to do in Commander. Those are all the brand new cards in the deck, so what we're going to look at next is the old cards, but with the new art. We have some great ones like this Arcane Signet, which is really cute. We also have Command Tower, and Exotic Orchard, which is frankly my favorite card art in the deck. I think it's beautiful, it's colorful, it's vibrant, it's really evocative, and I think it captures the idea of Bloomburrow really, really well. And if Exotic Orchard is the most beautiful art, I think that Farseek from this deck probably has the cutest art. I love the soft pastels, I love the cute bunny art, I think this is just great. There's also Generous Gift, and Martial Impetus. There's also Rites of Flourishing, and Swords to Plowshares, which have some beautiful new art as well. You've probably already seen this on Twitter, but there is a beautiful, beautiful alternate art Tamiyo, and what I think is probably one of the best landscape style cards in the game, Tempt with Discovery. Look at it, it's just gorgeous. And lastly, there's Wizard Class, which is just a fun class card, as I talked about before, and it has some sweet new art. So now that we've looked at the new cards and the old cards with new art, let's look at the full deck and get a better sense of what you're getting in it. Alright, let's get a look at this Precon deck. Right off the bat, I'm going to say don't hold your breath for some crazy land base, because let's face it, that's just not what we're getting in Precons. And honestly, they've come a long way since they initially came out, and this one isn't that bad. Starting off, we know that we have Tamiyo, which unfortunately, no slight against Moxfield, but they don't have the new art. This is the Tamiyo you get, worth a couple bucks. Not bad, not bad. The creature base, I'm actually pretty surprised with. We have a sweet reprint in the form of Colonian Hydra, which is worth a decent amount of money. There are also some really synergistic cards that'll work well in the deck. I think in particular Quain and Selvala are kind of good. They will be able to give your opponents cards which people want, and there's actually some decent payoff for that since you'll have Psychosis Crawl in your deck, meaning when you're drawing those cards as well, you're pinging opponents to their face. You've got cards like Sunscorcher Regent, which will gain you life and get really big really quickly. I think this is a great card in Commander. It just sits there until it eats removal or starts smashing face. I'm surprised to see Spore Frog in a Precon, although I think actually the Marin one had it. But this is a decent fog. There's just not a lot of reliable ways to get it back. Speaking of draws again, Chasm Skulker, again, great payoff for having a bunch of draws. The Body of Knowledge can get huge, and when it deals damage you draw even more cards, which again feeds back into Psychosis Crawler. There's a decent amount of protection with cards like Realm Cloak Giant, which is either a big body or a board wipe. And yeah, I think this is a pretty decently balanced creature base. You're missing out on the ones that are new, obviously, since again, Moxfield doesn't have them, but that's not a problem. Looking at sorceries, you have your typical ramp, you've got Cultivate, you've got Farseek. Promise of Loyalty is a really fun one as well, and Secret Rendezvous again can work quite well with A, Psychosis Crawler, or B, as a way to make a deal. Tempt with Discovery as we saw. There's the new card Wear Down, which is a gift card, which allows us to blow stuff up. It's kind of like Return to Dust without the exile at the same time. And honestly, paying 2 mana to blow up 2 artifacts or enchantments and only giving your opponent 1 card is pretty sweet, especially if you don't pick the opponent whose stuff is getting blown up. In terms of instants, you've got an Offer You Can't Refuse, which works really well with that Bloodroot Apothecary like I was talking about. Broken Wings has a lot of versatility in what it can hit, same as Generous Gift. Illusionist Gambit is a cool card, although I will be honest, I have never ever seen it in action. Again, same thing kind of with Intellectual Offering. I know you can draw a lot of cards with it, and it's pretty well costed for what it does, but again, I've never seen it get played. Long River's Pull is another gift card, which as we saw with the Jolly Gerbil, will work really well by giving you a card in addition to being able to be flexible. Perplexing Test is a versatile kind of instant speed board wipe, as it allows you to pick whatever mode is relevant the most. Same thing with Riot Control. It basically is a good fog and decent life gain, and honestly, any deck that's playing white should probably be playing both Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. Artifact-wise, you've got a ton of good stuff with Arcane Signet, Thought Vessel, Foulwalker Stone, Mind Stone, Soul Ring, you know, the typical stuff. And Swiftfoot Boots, great way to give haste and protect stuff. Gear Report Orrery is kind of, I guess, to fill into a draw step, but at the same time, it requires a few too many hoops, although it does help your opponents play out lands, and everyone gets to play out lands extra, so it feeds into that, you know, group hug kind of style. And again, Coveted Jewel. This is going to get passed around a lot, people are going to draw a lot of cards, and you can take it back and draw a lot of cards. I love Coveted Jewel, I think it's a great card for Commander. As far as enchantments go, I would have loved to see more of the Impetus cycle or more of this style of card, where basically it'll pump your opponent's creatures, give them some kind of advantage, but at the same time protecting you because you're not getting attacked by it. Hoofprints of Stag is great, as it's just going to sit there and get more and more counters on it, and you'll be able to make some bodies with it, because basically you're going to be drawing a ton of cards in this deck. Rites of Flourishing is something that I love to see, it really helps accelerate games a lot, and Simic Ascendancy is yet another way of an alternate win con basically, which I think is great, because frankly sometimes board states get so bungled up, it's so hard to get through. Tenuous Truth is a very well-costed enchantment, and as long as you and opponent have a good idea of what's going on, you're basically both going to reap a lot of benefits from it. Wizard class, as I saw before with the new art, is really cool, and yeah, I think it's a great class card. I want to see so many more class cards. I'm really excited, and hopefully we see some more in the future. As far as the land base goes, you have 4 of these basic, which isn't bad. You have the filter lands in the sense of the Flooded Grove. You have the, I'm not too sure what to call them, but pay 1 and get 2, 1 of each color kind of lands with the Overflowing Basin, the Sungrass Prairie, and the Skycloud Expanse. You also have the check lands where basically it comes in, make sure you have the type of basic you need. You also have what I think are called the Tango lands or the Battle lands. I like Tango lands more, but you have the Prairie Stream and the Canopy Vista for this. And surprisingly, we also have the fast lands from Mirrodin. Seachrome Coast and Razor Verge Thicket are interesting inclusions. I know we just had the cycle of them, or the opposite cycle of them recently, and yeah, they're good early on, but they come into play tapped later on, which I guess is kind of okay with the deck. And basically when you're playing 1 or 2 lands a turn extra with like Rites of Flourishing and stuff, probably isn't that bad since the next turn you're going to accelerate that much more. You also have the Temples of Enlightenment, Plenty, Mystery, the Scry ones. I would love to see the new Surveil ones in these Precon decks since I think they're getting really expensive as it goes. And you also have the Thriving line, which is great because they can act as fixing, allowing you to pick a color you're missing as they come in. Overall, I think the deck is pretty well balanced. There is a good amount of draw, which often is something I have a problem with in Precons. You'll have a ton of new cards and a lot of fun ways to work together, but you just never draw them. I do not think that will be a problem with this deck. And that is my deck reveal. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making this video, and be sure to let me know what was your favorite card from this deck. What is the favorite Precon from this set coming out? There's 4 decks, so there's probably something for everybody. And most importantly, which of these ears looked best on me? I totally did not make a mistake and order child-size ones, so that, you know, explains why they fit so perfectly on my head and I look so good with them. And as always, a big thank you to Wizards of the Coast for sending me this deck to preview for you all, and in an oddly fitting send-off, don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.